Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, December 18th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the New Hampshire Senate election and why it looks increasingly more optimistic for the Democratic Party moving forth into the brand new year, with the Democrats in a position where previously, just a month ago, they were terrified at the prospect of Governor Chris Sununu from entering into this race. He's a popular governor, recently won his election in 2020 by over 40 percentage points, and ultimately has been driving the state in a correct direction that Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike have approved of. He actually won by 30, not by 40. That was Phil Scott in neighboring Vermont. But the point being that no matter what that margin was, as long as it was above 15 points, for a Republican, that is a landslide victory, especially in a state that on the same exact ballot elected Joe Biden to the presidency by 7.7%. Now, Chris Sununu announced that he will not be running for Senate across the state of New Hampshire, instead deciding that he will be running for re-election of governor in the state of New Hampshire, which wasn't really the best news the GOP could have heard. I would say that the worst that they could have received was that he would be retiring from politics altogether, removing himself, introducing a new competitive governor's race, and also keeping a competitive Senate race. But I would say that this probably comes in as a position where the GOP was looking for this to be something that the Chris Sununu camp and his administration within the New Hampshire governor's office and mansion was simply not going to make. I think that there was so much speculation, so much energy, and so much built up to this that there was this wide expectation that Sununu was going to enter into this race. I mean, when he made this announcement, this was 7 days after Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin was chosen in the state of Virginia to lead the state for the next 4 years. And it looked as if the Republican Party was on a pathway to a red wave year in 2022. And while that may technically be true at this point in time, they were looking for this momentum, combined with the pressure from former President Trump, from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, from many Republicans across the state of New Hampshire and across the nation, that Chris Sununu would enter into this race. Because had he done so, all of the data indicated that Chris Sununu would win the eventual Senate race against incumbent Senator Maggie Hassan. But ultimately, he says no. And I made a video about this, talking about how Chris Sununu withdrawing from this race looks good for the Democratic Party, but it looks even better at this point in time for a bunch of other reasons. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So, who's running on the Democratic side? Before we get into the Republican part and why it's actually on the Republican side to make this race competitive, is because Maggie Hassan is the incumbent United States Senator. Now, she served as the governor before Chris Sununu, actually, and she was elected in 2016 against Kelly Ayotte. Kelly Ayotte was elected first in 2010, and even as an open seat, she was able to win over 60% of the vote. She was deemed an electoral juggernaut. She was someone who seemed to be unbeatable. She won every single county in a state that Barack Obama won by double digits just 2 years prior. And yet, ultimately, fast forward to 2016, she could not outrun President Trump by a margin that was substantial. Yet, looking at the election in 2022, she still seems to be a somewhat strong type of candidate for the GOP. But get this, even Kelly Ayotte is not going to run. In a statement she made with her husband and her family, she declares that she will be doing her work from home and that she will be focusing on electing Republicans here and focusing on her family and professional careers. It looks like Kelly Ayotte doesn't really have this indication that she wants to return to the United States Senate, at least not yet. And with those two announcements, you can already start to see the Republican Party's prospects in the state of New Hampshire fall out of their hands. You can start to see how this Senate race that could have gone completely in the opposite direction steer back in favor of the Democratic Party, even though nothing else seems to be working for the Democrats. Now, looking at the state of our nation right now, I will say Joe Biden is probably at a better position now than he was a month ago. And that's simply because his approval rating is at a better place. Gas prices seem to be on a somewhat seeming narrow decline. Nothing super substantial, but a decline I think is something that the Biden presidency has been anticipating or hoping for. Let's put it that way. And anything that the Democratic Party can get, I think they will take advantage of. Now, looking at our approval rating here, at any point in time, I would say if Joe Biden is unpopular, Democrats probably have already lost control of the House. And I stand by that point right now. But looking at my most recent projection in the state of New Hampshire and actually across the nation, a lot of these races have come down to the wire, meaning they are decided by tilt margins, meaning anywhere between 0.1 and 1%. Now, that's not a large margin for either political party. If you flip all of the states that currently have a tilt margin for the GOP, the Democrats only lose the majority by just one seat. That doesn't sound good for a Republican Party that just won in the November elections in Virginia by flipping a state by shifting it 13 points to the right. That doesn't sound good for a Republican Party that just shifted New Jersey 13 points to the right. Now, that's not to say that things couldn't get better for the GOP, but at this point in time, things don't seem to be surmounting into this red wave as we saw for Democrats back from 2017 to 2018 during that convergence time frame where Donald Trump was fading out of popularity, where his approval rating might have narrowly increased, but the Democratic agenda and the Democratic surge and support on the generic ballot never really faltered. Ultimately, I think what we are starting to see at this point in time is that the GOP is lessening their grip in some areas where otherwise they should be increasing it, as they did between 2009 and 2010, between 2013 and 2014. And this isn't to say the GOP can't recover, because I'm telling you right now, they could just recover in the final few days of the campaign season in 2022, as they did in the 2016 presidency, or as they have done in the past, as they did in the state of Virginia, where it took them less than a week to go from being the underdogs to the favorites. You know, looking at American politics, a lot can change in a brief period of time, but there are some things that occur on a routine basis for both political parties in midterms that need to be pointed out, and if they're not met, if they're not kept up with, it might indicate a little bit different in terms of what we can expect based off of our previous data. And that's what I'm pointing out to you today with the state of New Hampshire. Now, the reason and the premise for this video actually comes from new polls that came from the Trafalgar Group. And the reason why I point them out in specific is because they are a Republican-led pollster. They refuse to release their methodology out of the idea that they seem to get things more accurate than other polling companies. And to an extent, that is true. In 2016, they were able to accurately capture the sentiments of the Rust Belt, but then fast forward 2 years later into 2018, they inaccurately calculated many states. And then in 2020, they were about 50-50. On one hand, they predicted that Trump would win Georgia by 7 points, and then on the other hand, they said that Trump would be able to win Florida by 3 points, and he did. You know, looking at what their polling company has been able to do, sometimes they're spot on, and sometimes they're not. But one thing is consistent. They seem to always overestimate Republican support across these states. And that's why these two new polls from New Hampshire are so significant. Looking at the first poll that I'm showing you, right now you have Doug Bolduc, who is the current declared Republican frontrunner per se, just because he is the only somewhat notable name on the ballot. With Chris Sununu and Kelly Ayotte withdrawing themselves from the race, he seems to become the frontrunner almost immediately, only because there are no other top names. In this most recent poll, you can see that it is on par with what the University of New Hampshire has released. The University of New Hampshire released a number in July that showed that Maggie Hassan would defeat him by 10 points. Now, no matter what, 2022 was not going to be a 10-point victory for a Democratic nominee, even if it was a blue wave year that simply wasn't going to occur in the state of New Hampshire because it is almost always close. Fast forward to the month of October when Joe Biden was unpopular, Maggie Hassan only maintained a 5-point lead. But here comes a Republican-leaning pollster, one that always and consistently overestimates Republican supports. That's redundant, always overestimates Republican support, shows Maggie Hassan ahead by 6 percentage points. Think about that for just a moment. You have someone, you have a pollster, a polling company that shows completely different results in many cases in some of these races than what the actual results are. And even if they are correct, no matter what it is, it's overestimating Republicans. So even if they're right or wrong, at the end of the day, they're still showing the Democrats are going to win this Senate race. And it actually gets better for Maggie Hassan from here. When taking a look at this, I believe his name is Chris Morse, the president of the New Hampshire Senate right now, because they do have a trifecta. Let's go ahead and check here under the potential list here. Chuck Morse, not Chris. Chuck Morse, the president of the New Hampshire Senate, a Republican here. Maggie Hassan defeats him by 8 points in this most recent numbers. And again, remind yourselves of who is pulling this race. And if you want a little bit of a benchmark, okay, well, maybe they just have a skewed average. Maybe they aren't capturing a Republican base for once. You know, sometimes they could be capturing maybe a more Democratic base, and we just don't know. Where's the baseline for this? Well, here you have it. They also did a poll on the same exact questions in the state of New Hampshire about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden in a rematch for 2024. And get this, this same group of people that chose to re-elect on this potential ballot for 2022, Maggie Hassan over Doug Bullock by 6 points, over Chuck Morse by 8 points, chose to elect Donald Trump in 2024 by a margin of 2 points. So this tells you already that this electorate is working from a position where they're shifting from what were their 7.7% margin in 2020 to a 2-point margin for Trump. So that is nearly a 10-point universal shift to the right. And yet somehow, not somehow, but I would say at the detriment to the New Hampshire GOP, the Democratic Party seems to be performing much better than expected in these Senate races, even though on the same exact ballot, these people are inclined to elect Trump over Biden, according to this pollster. Isn't that interesting? Might I remind you, only one person could have defeated Maggie Hassan that was actually going to enter into the race. Kelly Ayotte was a bit iffy. Polls went back and forth on that one, but Chris Sununu was consistent. Not one poll showed him in the negative against Maggie Hassan. And yet, he withdrew himself from the race. Kelly Ayotte did the same thing. I don't know why. To be quite honest with you, I mean, it makes a little bit of sense if Chris Sununu wants to have some type of other political future. I mean, he can certainly run for Senate in a future election if there's an open race, if there's an open House seat. By all means, it's his. He's not going to lose. He has the name recognition for it. His family has a strong name. Sununu holds a lot of weight alone in the state of New Hampshire. He has a governorship lined up for him for the rest of his life, practically, if he wants to. He has so many positions, and he's in his 40s, I believe, so he doesn't really have much to worry about. This Senate race probably would have been one of his early opportunities, but certainly not his last. So looking at this, maybe he just wanted to pass it up on that case. But the Republican Party had it perfectly lined up for them, and they lost it. So all of these things, I think, combined with the fact that Joe Biden seems to be getting a narrow increase. Despite this, despite Joe Biden being down about 7 points nationwide, despite so many things seem to be working against the Democratic Party now, they still seem to be doing good in New Hampshire. In fact, based off of these recent numbers, I would argue even better than where they were before. You can see this. You can see this visualized in my shift from my November prediction right after Glenn Youngkin won the race to now. Right after Chris Sununu made that announcement that he wasn't going to run. After you see the withdrawal of Sean Parnell from the state of Pennsylvania. After you see the entrance of both David Perdue in Georgia, a rerun failed Senate candidate from 2021 who was first elected back in 2014, won more of the vote in his first election than the second time due to his clear and huge association with President Trump. And then you also see the entrance of Stacey Abrams. I mean, it seems as if the Democratic Party is putting forth, I would say, strong nominees, but also the GOP is losing some of their top-tier candidates, or even not necessarily their top-tier candidates, but the people who seem to have been already pre-selected, that people have been banking on, counting on to run in certain races, to win in certain races at that, and consequently carry other Republicans across the ballot, down ballot, or across the nation through the means of, increased fundraising efforts, less focus on certain races, allowing money to flow towards others. What do I mean by that? Well, for instance, let's say, Chuck Grassley, his announcement in Iowa that he's running for re-election removes the idea of Iowa becoming a competitive Senate race, all of a sudden becomes solid. Boom, the GOP doesn't need to run ads there, doesn't need to spend money there as much as they would have had Chuck Grassley decided to retire. Same thing can be applied to a bunch of other Senate races. But just looking at the state of New Hampshire and the trajectory of the race so far, I would say the Democratic Party has pretty much benefited from every single bit of information that has come out recently from the state itself. Just so much seems to be piling on for Democrats nationwide, yet they find themselves with this silver lining in the state of New Hampshire, and it cannot be ignored. Because the GOP seems to be scrambling. They lost their governor. They're less than a year away from the election, and they simply don't have a strong candidate on the ballot. You've seen in all of these polls that Maggie Hassan defeats everyone but Chris Sununu. And that's why this is such an important race. And it will truly be one of these few races that determines the balance of power. I currently have it rated as one of the 3 closest races that I project for 2022. That is very important to note. If these are the closest races and Democrats are ahead by 6 to 8 points in the more recent polling numbers from Republican pollsters, what's to say that other states might not shift towards the left as well in retaliation to certain things that might be coming out and a lot of other things that are seemingly being brought back up as mainstream issues, such as the Supreme Court, abortion issues, COVID-19. We've all started to see how in the past 48 hours, this nation has practically gone from 0 to 100. I mean, we are looking at at-home kits being sold out, right? 3-hour, 4-hour long lines. In fact, myself, I have just gotten home from my college campus, and, a lot of people that I know have begun to test positive. I am now on my 5th round of testing, all which have come back negative, thankfully, right? All which have come back negative. But you see, this type of worry, this type of concern brings back this issue of COVID-19 back into the public eye, back into public concern, and thus becomes another issue that might not necessarily have been a mainstream one for 2022 had there not been the Delta variant, Omicron variant, whatever it might be. So we are looking at the beginning of 2022 shaped back up, and right now looking specifically into the state of New Hampshire. The Democratic Party seems to be doing very well based off of everything that we've seen so far in a race that truly could have gone in the complete opposite direction, all at the hand of one person who decided ultimately that he was not going to run. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.